All right, here we go. Take one. Your first appointment with an individual that is practicing psychiatry will usually last about maybe 1.5 hours. And your psychiatrist is going to listen to you talk about your concerns and your symptoms. They'll ask questions, maybe about your general health. They'll ask questions about family history. They'll possibly take your blood pressure and do a basic physical checkup if needed. And they usually will ask you to fill out a questionnaire. There is usually going to be a lot of questions. This long appointment gives the psychiatrist the time to listen to you and to hear your whole story. They may also want to speak with other health professionals or members of your family. Your psychiatrist may order some more tests to help them understand what is going on with you. And it may take a few appointments for your psychiatrist to make a full diagnosis. And then they work out a treatment plan, which is a combination of therapies that can ultimately suit your health needs, your personal preferences, your family situation, and your age group. You and your psychiatrist will work together to develop a treatment plan that is right for you. The psychiatrist might provide the treatment themselves, or they may recommend you see another healthcare professional, for example, a psychologist. Now, this all sounds good, but my doctor doesn't and hasn't done any of those things. Now, I say my doctor because I've seen him 3 times now, but my purpose wasn't to get treatment, but was instead designed to investigate some very unethical and dangerous practices that I want to present. So stay tuned as I am going to continue my pursuit on a doctor who continues to put people's lives at risk. Trapped in a dream, I can't deny that. Taunted by lies, climbing Everest without a rope. My name's Eric McCoy, and as always, I get high, but drugs aren't the way. You know, about 3 years ago, I went to a doctor for the sole purpose of seeing what drugs I could get and acquire them in a very short period of time, and ultimately see how irresponsible this particular doctor was. This doctor was introduced to me by Jody Barber because he was who her son was seeing. Jared Barber passed away on January 8th of 2010 after being prescribed a cocktail of medications by this same doctor that ultimately led to his death. You know, doctors are defined as medical experts and honestly should always be looking out for the best interests of their clients. And I wanted to see how important the clients were and if safety was a major concern with this guy. Now, this is how he started me on the first medication that he prescribed me, which was back in 2018, from a sample pack out of his cabinet. Take a look. So if you read on this thing, it says, read enclosed medication guide for patients. He pulls this sample out and he tears out all of the instructions. So I actually do not have this on there. And then he goes and he pulls out 2 of these medications. He cuts them and then he puts them into a bindle. Now, for a drug addict, this is very common, right? And this is something that a lot of meth addicts will see. And I'm actually going to open this up and tell me, for any of you meth addicts out there, if this looks very similar to what you would find. We open this thing up
and we have Pristique. It looks like chunks of meth, kind of, which I thought was very weird. This was really a awkward thing to to do, and to put it in a bindle. I'm actually very concerned to even drive with this, because if I get pulled over, there's a pretty good chance I'm going to get a ticket for possession of Pristique, which may originally be written as prescription of meth or something else. Who knows? Whatever the cops define it as, because this is not a prescription, so it really doesn't define it. So this was actually really good. The thing about it is, I met with the doctor. The doctor basically said that we're going to start with this and then come back next week and we could treat your ADHD. ADHD medications could be, Adderall or something of that nature. I played my sleep problem a little bit, so probably later I could even get more medication, maybe some Seroquel, some things that will help me, sleep and things like that. So I wanted to do this thing. This was not really designed as a witch hunt. This was to show the concern that we have with kids potentially going and being able to go to doctors, get medications or whatever it is, and ultimately, switch to something bigger and better because they're, taking medications. The doctor that I met with was pretty much all about medications. He's a family doctor, is really what he's defined as, but he does primarily psychiatry type work. His office has a couch, chair. There's nothing in there in terms of meeting with anybody and doing any kind of physical or anything of that nature. Strictly psychiatric type work, which again, typically that would be a psychiatrist, I'd think. That would focus a little bit more on that kind of stuff, even though I know nothing that this guy is doing is illegal. Although I do question this type of behavior, cutting things up and putting them in bindles, and then having a cabinet that's just full of medications and drugs that he can basically hand out at will. Which look like a bunch of samples. Again, I wasn't able to look in it, but there were a lot of bottles that looked like medications also. So I'm not really sure on that, but I do want to put that out there. But this does prove, I think, my point and really what I'm trying to do here. And I want to thank everybody for watching and paying attention to this. I hope this is very educational, because that was my whole point in this, was to provide some kind of education regarding this, and maybe to get that out there. And again, look up your doctors. This doctor is on probation or has been on probation. All of the information is in the medical board website on this doctor, which I was able to find going in. And so thank you guys for watching, and we will see you soon. We'll be doing other things that hopefully is very educational for people also. Thank you.
So I decided to have another visit with this doctor. And so what happened, you may ask? Well, that's a very good question. And I'm going to tell you in a little bit. He asked a few questions, and because I had seen him in 2018, he knew exactly what to give me. 2018. That was 3 years ago. Had things changed? So I had to explain, obviously, some of the reasons for not coming. And, I obviously had stopped taking the medications. I couldn't focus. I couldn't concentrate. I was highly unmotivated. I couldn't sleep. My wife and I fought all the time. We only had one vehicle, so it made it difficult for me to get to his office, which is about 40 miles from where I live. None of this was true. Well, except for the fact that we live 40 miles from his office. Before I tell you what happened and what he ultimately gave me, I want to explain and take you back to 2017 with this doctor. Now, on December 17th, 2007, the Orange County Sheriff's Department were called to his house, and there was somebody in the backyard, which happened to be this doctor, who was screaming and yelling and cussing and threatening his own life. The sheriff's department attempted to get him to calm down. They were unable to, and they ended up having to taser him about 3 or 4 times and then 5150 him. And then it was on January 13th of 2008 that he was released from the hospital with the diagnosis of bipolar disorder. Now, I want you to think about this for a second. He was admitted on December 17th, and he was released on January 13th. That's 28 days. Now, in California, the involuntary commitment of individuals in mental health facilities is governed by the Lanterman-Petrus Short Act that was enacted in 1972. Now, if you're given a 5150, you are placed on a 72-hour hold to be evaluated as a danger to self or a danger to others. And obviously, in his case, it was a danger to self. Now, if you're determined to still be a threat to self or others, you're given a 5250, which is you're basically certified. And this is for no more than 14 days of intensive treatment. So how did he stay 28 days? Well, if during the 14-day certification you attempted to threaten your own life or remain in imminent danger to other people, the doctor can place you on an additional 14-day hold, which is known as a recertification for intensive treatment, or a 5260. So obviously, during that period of time, even in the hospital, he was threatening his own life. And that's the only way they would have been able to keep him. So you now have a doctor that was released January 13th, 2008 from a psychiatric hospital as a danger to self with a valid medical license and able to practice medicine immediately. Now you may ask, how's that possible? Shouldn't the medical board suspend his license immediately? Nope. 4 months after this, and this was on May 3rd of 2008, he was interviewed by a medical investigative department from the medical board. And during this interview, he stated that he had an episode of hypomania that was about 3 years earlier, and he was prescribed Seroquel by a doctor. Now, this doctor ended up moving out of state, and he decided that he was going to prescribe his own medications. And then it was on January 18th of 2008, he underwent a psychiatric evaluation, and they diagnosed him as a mood disturbance of psychotic proportions. They said that he suffers from either bipolar or unipolar disorder and requires medication and lifetime treatment. And then they go on to actually say that his disorder has impacted his ability to practice safely. And this is ultimately what led to the hospitalization for a psychotic breakdown. That should immediately have suspended his license, impacted his ability to practice safely. Nope. It wasn't until May 10th of 2009. Now, this is almost a year and a half after this, after that hospitalization. His license was revoked, but it was stayed as long as he completed a 5-year probation, and there were certain stipulations. He requested a stay of execution, which they approved, which gave him another 19 days. This entire time, he could practice medicine without any kind of supervision, any kind of oversight. And this was 5 months before Jody's son, Jared, started seeing this doctor. So what was the reason for this revocation? Well, it was section 2239 of the code, which basically states that the use or prescribing for or administering to him or herself of any controlled substance, you can't do. And this had nothing to do with his inability to practice medicine safely, which is what they had determined. So he was on probation for about 2.5 years, which is obviously half of the 5-year probation that he was ordered. And he wanted to get his probation terminated. Now, he explained basically that this probation has hurt him in a number of ways. He's lost a lot of patients. There were several insurance carriers that were not paying for his services because he's on probation. He couldn't get his family practice board certification renewed while he is on probation. And his malpractice carrier dropped him. And he's lost patients. So after this review, they basically stated that he had complied with all the terms of probation, with the exception of the fact that it was for 5 years. And they granted his termination of probation, which was on February 9th of 2012. Now, since he completed probation and the requirements, he should be up to speed on his ethical duties. And you would think he was reformed of some form. Well, maybe not. So on July 2nd, 2015, his license was revoked again, but stayed again. 5 more years of probation. Ordered revoked, but effective 30 days later. So they revoked it. They put him on probation, but it was another 30 days before this was actually to be enacted. Obviously, they don't take a license being revoked as very serious. Now, what was this one for? Well, it revolved around 5 patients and was a result of the same thing for each one of them. Section 2266 of the code states, the failure of a physician and a surgeon to maintain adequate and accurate records relating to the provision of services to their patients constitutes unprofessional conduct. Every one of these, all 5, stated that he failed to perform a complete psychiatric examination, history, past history, mental status examination, and conclusions on the patients. Also failing to maintain adequate and accurate records regarding his care and the treatment of the patient. Now, during his probation, he was required to participate in what's called the PACE program. And what this program does is it promotes ongoing quality improvement and professional development in the medical field. They offer physician monitoring services throughout their physician enhancement program and a number of continuing professional development that's also known as continuing medical education courses. Now, he requested again about halfway through this 5-year probation for penalty relief, requesting early termination, and this was on July 18th of 2017. Now, this is where things get very interesting for me. When he requested this, they had submitted reports from this PACE program, and this is what was stated in these documents. And they basically stated that during the phase 1 2-day assessment, it was concerning. He performed an incomplete history and a physical exam on their mock patient, and his write-up of the encounter was considered unsatisfactory. During the oral clinical exam in psychiatry, this doctor was unable to present a case in a clear and organized manner. He used incorrect terminology, and his knowledge of alternative medications was inadequate. There was a doctor that rated all of my doctor's charts as unsatisfactory. They stated that his notes were very poor, they were minimalistic, and they lacked documentation of mental status examinations as well as treatment rationales. Now, his visits were brief, and he omitted the mental status examination in each of the cases. This will also come to when I describe my story. This doctor did not perform or request adequate laboratory testing. He did not provide adequate patient education regarding drugs recommended, and the overall histories obtained were missing a lot of elements. The doctor's performance was entirely unacceptable for a physician specializing in psychiatry, and that's a quote. So phase 2 of the PACE program, they submitted their documentation and stated that it was also concerning. Significant areas of deficiency were identified in all of the components of this phase 2 evaluation. During the clinical observation, according to one of the doctors, my doctor tended to jump to one working diagnosis without the ability to develop a broad differential of diagnoses or a clear plan to rule out other courses of psychiatric illnesses. He also had a tendency to jump to one or two favorite medications without being able to formulate a full biopsychosocial treatment plan. He did not demonstrate full familiarity with the content and the format of a psychiatric evaluation. Even after feedback, he continued to omit the psychiatric review of systems or the full past psychiatric history in his write-ups. That also stated that he needs more work on documenting mental status exams with specific focus on documenting suicidal ideations, self-harm behaviors, and propensity for violence. It also said he had difficulty with medications that were not frequently used. My doctor demonstrated a significant lack of knowledge regarding schizophrenia and of office-based treatment of opiate dependency. They also stated that his self-constructed questionnaires that he gives his patients are inadequate. They also found that the doctor consistently failed to include a mental status exam and a suicide assessment in his chart notes. Now, I'm going to quote one of the doctors that said, significant areas of deficiency, which I directly observed, included, number 1, rapport building and empathy. Number 2, interview organization. 3, understanding, explaining a modern biopsychosocial conceptualization of psychiatric illness. 4, understanding and discussing non-medication treatment options for psychiatric illnesses. And 5, understanding and discussing the risks of certain high-risk medications. They found his performance certainly below the standard of care for an expert in psychiatry. Now, he testified that his practice really hasn't changed because there really was no wrongdoing. When he was asked questions about what he learned when completing the coursework that was required by the terms of his probation, he stated that he, quote, learned things that doctors already know and stuff we as doctors already know to do. Now, my doctor submitted letters from the individual that was his monitor, and this was Carlos Montano, who's a probation monitor for him. Now, Dr. Montano wrote in a report on July 7th of 2017 that he has known this doctor for at least 7 years and is aware of his probation with the board. If he was his monitor, you would hope so. Dr. Montano was, again, his monitor for the first time that he was placed on probation and has been serving as his probation monitor for his current probation. Now, according to my doctor, again, Dr. Montano is an addiction specialist, not a psychiatrist. Now, I want to explain something really quick about Dr. Montano. It's Dr. Xavier Montano, and he's now been arrested. He was sentenced to a year in jail for insurance fraud. And he is now also being investigated by the medical board. Do you think anything's going to happen to him? Probably not. And probably my doctor will be his monitor. They did decide that. So my doctor failed to meet his burden of proving by clear and convincing evidence that he has been sufficiently rehabilitated to overcome the board's former adverse determination. And so, in the interest of public protection, he was ordered to remain on probation. And he remained on probation until July 31st of 2020. So now, what happened with my visit? Let us see if he's actually changed and looking out for his clients. So upon my first meeting 3 years ago, I was never given any evaluation, period. The doctor asked me very few questions. I just explained to him that, again, I can't focus. I'm having a hard time sleeping. I can't concentrate. I'm having a hard time getting a job. And he's taking down notes and not really doing any kind of mental examination. I actually did not go in there appearing to have any psychotic features or anything related to ADHD or depression. There was nothing you could see. Everything that he learned was from what I said. That's not really how that actually works. So he had prescribed me Pristiq. Now, Pristiq was also the first medication that he had prescribed to Jared Barber. And I had shown you the video of how he presented it to me to take it in the way that he said. And then I was given Wellbutrin. Now, I want to explain something really quick. So if a doctor is looking out for your best interest, it's important for you to know what the side effects are and possibly any conditions that you have that may affect the medications. Now, I didn't take any of the stuff that he's prescribed to me, but Pristiq is what's called an SNRI. It's serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor. Now, if you look at the things that say, do not take this medication if you have high blood pressure, if you have a seizure disorder, if you've ever had heart problems. And these same things are actually related to all of the medications that he gave me. He also prescribed me Wellbutrin, buprenorphine, which is a SDRI, which is serotonin and dopamine reuptake inhibitors. Both of these are feel-good medications so far. And then he prescribed me Adderall. Now, Adderall is obviously an amphetamine. It's a Schedule II drug. Now, the first time that I saw him, he gave me Pristiq, and that was it. And then he wanted me to call him in a week, let him know how I was doing. I called him in a week. I said, I think a little better, not really noticing a whole lot. And that's when he prescribed me. He called in Wellbutrin. And then about a month after this, I went and saw him again. And this is when he gave me Adderall. And then he also gave me Trazodone for the sleep disorder that I'm supposedly having. He wrote me 3 separate prescriptions for Adderall, all on triplicate forms, dated 1 month apart from each other. And so again, after the second visit, I was now on Pristiq, Wellbutrin, Trazodone, and Adderall. Now, I hadn't seen him in 3 years. And so when I went back to this visit, it was not a very long visit. It was a fairly short visit. And I got 3 separate prescriptions for Adderall, all dated 1 month apart from each other. So now within 3 visits of this guy, I've had 6 prescriptions for Adderall written. He also wrote me a prescription for Wellbutrin. He wrote me a prescription for Pristiq, and he actually switched my sleep medication to Seroquel. Now, he also declared that because I do live so far, that when I'm running low on my Adderall, all I need to do is call him and he'll mail me the prescriptions, which I don't think is actually legal. So this is where I'm having major concerns with this doctor. Now, some people may ask, okay, so, if you're like kind of a proponent of maybe legalizing drug, which I am because, obviously I think it would help with things. But here's where I have a problem with this. And again, we're talking about a medical doctor that is quote unquote an expert. If I'm out there using drugs on my own, I know my dealer's not an expert. I know I'm not getting any information. But now, if I'm going to somebody who is a licensed medical doctor who has gone to school, one of their jobs is to educate me on these side effects of these medications. Never mentioned a single one. Never asked me if I had high blood pressure. Never took my blood pressure. Never asked me if I had heart problems. Never asked me if I ever had seizure disorders. Never asked me any of the questions that it actually says when you look up those medications to not take this if you have these conditions. None of that was asked. Has he changed? Absolutely not. You're going to see more of this, and I plan on going back to see this doctor again. I'm going to actually videotape it. I'm going to have audio so you can actually hear. I want this information to get out there. This doctor needs to lose his license. I'm actually at a place now where I don't really blame the doctor anymore. I blame the American Medical Board. If he actually has a psychiatric problem, which is not his fault, he should not be practicing medicine. And this is where I'm highly concerned with this guy. He seems to, again, favor certain medications. And it also brings up the question, too, of kickbacks for various medications. I'm not going to get into all that, but you can actually look up, there's a site you can look up to find out how much particular doctors have been paid by pharmaceutical companies in different years. So again, I wanted to share this information. You'll see more on this. I want to thank everybody for tuning into another episode of High While Clean. Keep getting high. But again, let's do it clean. Take care.